Hi, welcome to the 20th episode of Startups Right. Today, my guest is Lisa Wehden. She has a very significant experience both on investor and entrepreneur side of things, but as of now, she's the CEO of Plymouth and the founder and CEO of Plymouth, which we will talk more about as we progress through the episode. Very nice to have you on, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Same here. I think what your company does is super exciting, and we'll get more into it. But as I always do, I'm gonna start with the background, right? So you studied Oxford at Oxford. You studied history, and tell me about your time at Oxford and how it was transformative in any way for you.
Totally. So I grew up in a very small town in the north of England. It was a village with just 2,000 people. My mum actually moved from Algeria to the UK, so she was an immigrant. And we found ourselves in this very rural northern town. And as a good immigrant mum, she emphasized education, education, education. And so I went to a state school, a comprehensive school. And during my time there, I ended up studying obsessively. And I loved maths and science, but history was the subject that really grasped me. And the reason why I loved history so much is that it's the stories of individuals and institutions over time and how they interact and impact the world. And what I really discovered was that very small groups of people can ultimately change the course of how entire nation states are constructed, built, and where we go as a society. And I became really interested in learning more about these stories. Great power nations like uh, the US, the UK, Russia, China. How did they come to be? And that was all kind of in the history books that I was reading. And so ended up deciding that I wanted to study at university, and Oxford was the best school in the UK to study history. And it was a really unusual experience because Oxford has the tutorial system. So when I was 18, I would sit down with a professor one on one each week, and we would debate and talk about the essay that I had written. And it really kind of helped me develop this style of thinking that was very analytical, very curious. And it was old school. Like Oxford is very old school. We were like writing essays, handing it to a professor. We would debate it out. But I think it really changed how I thought about problems and understanding how you can have an impact in the world.
That's super cool. And once you finished, actually, just quickly, while you were studying at Oxford, did you have plans to just like go into, I don't know, like the investor finance side of things, or it was just kind of like because you started working at entrepreneurs first, which we'll talk about soon. But while you were in college, what were your career kind of goals, aspirations?
I really wanted to be an academic. So when I just loved studying. Like I was obsessive about studying. I loved writing papers. And didn't think I was going to become a technologist. Like that was not actually my aspiration when I first started. I ended up actually becoming part of this organization called the Oxford Union. And the Oxford Union is this big debating society, the largest debating society in the world. And it hosts really famous individuals, so politicians, economists, actors. We actually hosted Eric Schmidt, Jack Dorsey, Brian Chesky, really famous technologists. And it was during my time at the Oxford Union, I eventually got elected to be president. And on meeting these technologists, I really understood that these were the individuals that were changing the world. I thought with the most interesting ideas at the fastest pace. And that was the spark for me to want to start working in the technology industry. I thought that these individuals were just moving really quickly on their ideas compared to government institutions. And so that, second year at Oxford, I was like, I got to get into this technology industry. And everyone else was looking at law, consulting, finance. Like that was the whole kind of like traditional ambitious person's career path. And it was like 2018 in the UK. The technology industry was very small. Um, and that was the beginning of my desire to go and work in the technology industry.
Got it. Correct me if I'm wrong. You after that, after you graduated, you went to Germany to work at Entrepreneurs First, right?
Actually, after I graduated, I started a company.
Oh, okay. All right. Mhm.
Yeah, I started as a small company and ended up coming to SF for 3 months, sleeping on a friend's couch, doing the like classic hustle. And because of the visa, I actually couldn't stay. Like I couldn't get a US work visa. I was on an ESTA at the time. I wasn't working. I was like meeting people, but um, and so basically had to come back. Didn't think the UK was the best place to build that company, and joined Entrepreneur First. And there's an interesting story about joining Entrepreneur First, actually.
You moved to Germany for that, right? And you started, essentially you started your entrepreneurship and investing career like more officially, formally. How did you come across that opportunity? How would you describe your time at EF, Entrepreneurs First? And actually tell me about what EF, what's the vision and mission of EF in the first place?
Totally. So I had an amazing mentor called Charlie Songhurst. So Charlie Songhurst is this very prolific angel investor. He also used to be very senior at Microsoft. And he said to me, Lisa, you seem like an ambitious person. You should join the most ambitious company we could find in the UK, which was Entrepreneur First. And that was run and it continues to be run by Matt Clifford and Alice Bentinck, two incredible entrepreneurs. And their core insight was that um, Europe and Asia were missing out on some of the world's best founders because there weren't entrepreneurial ecosystems there. So, unlike San Francisco, where you had YC and dozens of other accelerators driving entrepreneurship, that didn't exist in Europe and Asia. And so they went to build that. And I was lucky to get the role with Matt. I was originally his chief of staff. And about 2 months into the role, he asked me to go to Berlin because he said, like, we're opening up an office there. Can you go and help scientists and engineers consider doing entrepreneurship? And so ended up going to Berlin. I initially thought it was only going to be for like 3 weeks. Like I didn't plan on being there forever. And I was working with a guy called Zeffy. Zeffy now works at Sequoia. And there was a team of four of us. It was me, Jack, Zeffy, and Philip. And our job was to reach out to hundreds of scientists and engineers across Germany to get them to join the EF program in Berlin. So we were like cold calling, hosting events, asking people like come and do entrepreneurship because we really believe technical founders have skills that they could be using. And so the goal was really to enable this alternative career path, a non-traditional career path for these individuals to learn how to build companies. And that was what we did at EF.
Got it. Um, just to circle back a bit, by the way, if I'm looking to the sides because I'm looking at the questions I have, so I'm paying attention to you.
Okay.
You studied history, but you went the entrepreneur route and you started focusing more on the tech side of things, right? And you started building and investing in AI, machine learning, tech space. Coming from a history background, which is not very technical, right? Um, was it a challenge? Was it an impediment to your kind of like investing and entrepreneur career, or do you think it was actually helpful in a very unique way?
I think it was incredibly helpful insofar as a lot of investing is studying markets and studying technology to understand whether they're applicable for a specific business case. Can they actually become transformative technologies? And so you end up doing a lot of background research on, what does the market look like? What is the core technological insight? What like customers are willing to pay for this? What's the initial idea? And that all takes analytical thinking and being able to build a map up in your head around what this could be. And I think that was really part of kind of my history education, really thinking through, looking at history as a guide, like where does this technology fit into the next phase? The other part of it is startups and movements. As a startup, you're building a movement in the future. You're trying to recruit individuals and customers on board. does the founder, one of the things I was looking at was like, does the founder have the ability to tell a message that could show a vision of the future that really could be transformational? And that is a storytelling exercise, which is what history taught me, like the stories of the past. Also, some of the best investors actually have studied history. So Mike Moritz from Sequoia actually studied history. Kevin Hartz, I think, actually studied some history as well. And so I think, yeah, you don't have to be just purely technical. I did end up learning a lot about the technical aspects of these technologies because I'm a lifelong student. But I think the humanities can teach us a lot about technology.
Yeah. Um, VCs obviously differ in their approaches and in their quality too, right? Some VCs just look for really just to find the earliest opportunity, invest, and kind of like forget about the company. Some VCs are involved along the way. They're trying to help to build it's just very involved and engaged with the companies. But also like they invest in so many different sectors and technologies. Um, how do you manage to be like a good, like, because you have significant experience working and also dealing with VCs, how do you manage to be a good VC in such a way where like you get to be investing in so many different sectors, but also be engaged and involved and helping companies continue to build and not just like finish with the early on investment and then forget about the company?
Yeah, I think a core skill is being attentive, actually listening to founders and deeply kind of spending time understanding what the founder will know the biggest problems of the business. Like the investor will have an outside perspective and can also be very helpful on sharing like market dynamics because a founder is typically very narrow on the problem they're solving. They're not studying other competitors in the market, or at least not initially, not in the seed stage. Like you're just focused on your entity. And so I think for me, it always starts with a relatively like humble mindset and listening to the founders initially to understand what problems that they're trying to solve. And you can do this in many different ways that protects the founder's time. Like when a founder sends an investor update every month, like read the investor update, understand what's going on in the business, study the market, try and think about the competitors, see how you can be helpful in supporting the founder to refine their messaging, like differentiated messaging and their value prop. And then also just elevating anything that the founder is doing, like, if they're doing events or public communications, like ensuring that you are a huge advocate and a supporter. And then thinking through like customer intros are usually incredibly helpful, and so like can you be helpful in like helping them move forward on the critical things of their business. And so I think it starts with being very attentive, understanding the problems and the challenges and the opportunities. Do your background research and work. Like don't expect to hear everything directly from the founder. Like see what information you have, and then be as helpful as possible with useful introductions.
Got it. After Entrepreneurs First, you joined Bloomberg, right? And you started working. I didn't know Bloomberg had a VC arm. That's very cool. Um, how does that happen? And usually you hear about VCs being kind of like the standalone VC firms, right? Bloomberg having a VC arm. Was it unique in its approach and its the way they were conducting it, or was it just a very typical VC way to just belong to like a larger company?
It was to answer your first question around how I got the opportunity. I was living in Berlin and I was looking at San Francisco online, like Twitter and like LinkedIn, and I saw like this huge buzz around San Francisco. And after 2 years of being in Berlin, I was like, I have to move to San Francisco if I'm going to be in the technology industry seriously. Like it's the place to be. So I took a flight to San Francisco and spent a week like reaching out cold to VCs, getting as many introductions as possible, saying like, hey, I want to like be in the VC industry. And then I was able to finally land a job at Bloomberg's VC, and I was like over the moon. And it was a very atypical fund because actually they don't invest as a strategic interest into Bloomberg. Like obviously they want to learn more about technology, but they are willing to invest in things that are not directly applicable to Bloomberg. So Flexport, for example, the freight forwarding company, was one of the biggest successes of the fund, but it's not directly related to Bloomberg's business. And so it was a strategic decision to ensure that the fund's returns were the most important thing, not just a traditional corporate VC fund that is investing for strategic interests. And so that was really unique because we were able to invest in, anything related to the future of work, which was the fund's thesis. And yeah, it was an amazing 2 years. I learned so much about the technology industry in SF, and was like building founder relationships, doing conversations with leaders in the industry. Like, it was just a very inspiring 2 years.
Got it. And you've worked and built and invested both in Europe and US. What major differences you see between those two geographies, and what kind of like changes would you like to see in European and British ecosystems?
Yeah, I think that there are a few kind of differences and things that I would love to see change. So, number one is that typically European founders undersell themselves enormously, and they might have a much more promising business or idea than they are communicating, and they need help kind of telling that storytelling. On the flip side, American founders are so good at storytelling that you have to like read between the lines to see if like actually the business is doing well, because they are so good at telling stories, and you're like, is this actually working? Um, the other thing is that the ecosystem around building companies is just not as mature in Europe as it is in San Francisco and New York. Like, there is a rich ecosystem of angel investors, people paying it forward. The whole kind of community around here is focused on building technology companies, whereas in Europe and Asia, it's still early in that journey. But I do think specifically the UK has an enormous advantage to leverage the research institutions it has and build much more robust entrepreneurial ecosystems to help talent there grow. And I'm really excited about Entrepreneurs First work in London because they have worked, they have found talent from lots of universities like Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge to help those individuals build companies. And then they also partner them with SF investors. And I think the SF London relationship's becoming much more stronger because there's talent in London and the UK and investment in SF. And if we can bridge those two together, I think lots of special things can happen from a company perspective.
Got it. Um, which really ties well to our next, conversation discussion about your company, Plymouth.
Yeah.
I know there's a personal story behind it, so I'm curious to hear more about it in your own words and how you decided to start this company.
Yeah. So I think everyone had a COVID hobby, and my COVID hobby was US immigration. So um, I'd been in the US for a year on a J1 visa, which is a temporary 12-month visa, and I was desperate to stay. I didn't get selected for the H1B lottery, and I was just stumped. Like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, how do I stay in the US? I can't get H1B. I wasn't eligible for another visa, which is the L1. And I was talking to some tech friends, and they were like, apply for the O1. And I was like, what's this O1 visa? Like, what's this route? And the O1 visa is a 3-year work visa, and it's called the extraordinary persons visa. And I was like, I don't think I'm extraordinary. Like, like, how do I prove that I'm extraordinary? And they were like, there's 8 criteria, and you have to meet 3 out of the 8, and they're much more manageable than you think. So, for example, if you judge hackathons, you can meet one of the criteria. If you join a membership organization like YC or EF or South Park Commons, that's another criteria. So that's already 2 out of 8 that you could possibly meet. And so I ended up talking to a bunch of different attorneys, and they actually kind of discouraged me from applying, but I got it in my head that I could actually apply. I was like, I think I can build a story about this because I'm a historian. I was like, I think there's a story here. And I ended up kind of pitching my own story. I was working with this kind of terrible law firm. I actually got rejected from the O1, and I reapplied with a new attorney. So it took me this crazy kind of 9-month process that I just like kept on applying and kept on applying, and yeah, finally got the O1. And in doing that, I understood that a lot of it was a storytelling exercise. Some individuals kind of undersell themselves, and you can make the process much simpler with technology. And so I thought, what a great problem to solve, like helping more immigrants build in America based on my personal journey. Could I actually build something that could solve this problem for many more people?
Got it. Which industries usually benefit from visa like all one? Is it just tech, or is there other industries too that people, if you know?
Yeah, so there's this visa called the O1B. So there's the O1A and the O1B.
Hmm.
O1A is for technology, science, business. O1B is for the creative arts. So, movie, film, theater. Um, and the O1B is super popular. Like more O1Bs get issued than O1As, like um, every single year. And so the Hollywood industry has really figured it out. Like models, actresses, actors actually come over on the O1 visa all the time. And actually, less than 5,000 STEM individuals use the O1A. And so, our mission at Plymouth is to 10x the number of STEM individuals applying for the O1A, because if Hollywood can figure it out, the technology industry certainly should be able to figure it out.
Got it. That's really cool. And you already kind of touched upon that, but besides 10xing, what's the long term vision and mission you have with your company, with Plymouth? What's the next 10 years? How does it look like for you?
Yeah, so our vision is to become the on ramp for the American dream.
Mhm.
And the goal is to enable immigrants to build their life here in a fast and straightforward way. So you can imagine that when you come to America as an immigrant, you don't have anything. You don't have any, uh, you know, banking, SSN, taxes, all these things you have to figure out from scratch. This is what I went through. I was like, I couldn't get a credit card for the first 9 months I was here. I didn't know how to get my social security number. Certainly didn't know how to do my taxes the first year. I was like asking all my friends, I was like, hey, I'm an immigrant. Like, how do I do my taxes? And so we want to become the one-stop platform to help navigate your life in America and become the trusted guide that you turn to when you need to navigate some of life's hardest challenges. The other part is that we build a community around what we're doing. So we've hosted big community events with leading immigrants in America to give back to the ecosystem. So we hosted a public event with Patrick Collison, founder of Stripe, who shared his insights around his journey in America. Amjad Masad, CEO of Replit, sharing his insights in America. And so we really believe there's this powerful immigrant community that can come together to really help pay it forward to new arrivals.
What you're doing is really genuinely so amazing. Any recent success stories you would like to share from your company, or obviously if they're confidential, you don't have to talk about them. But
No, we have a lot of our success stories are public online because
Mhm.
people will tweet or post a LinkedIn post about their journeys. And so one of the founders we worked with is called JC Batash. He is um, unbelievably talented. So he's Canadian and from Saudi Arabia. Um, he um, he also grew up in Lebanon, so he's like got this like amazing background, and he's building a new form of nuclear fusion to help accelerate the energy transition. He is collaborating with the U.S. government, collaborating with Livermore. He's just like this unbelievable founder, and we helped him with his O1 and his EB1A. So now he's on his way to getting a green card. The other individual we worked with recently is a guy called Gabriel Peterson. He is a 22-year-old Swedish dropout, and he is working as an AI engineer at Midjourney, which is one of the biggest AI companies of our generation. And he's one of the best programmers I think I've interacted with, and I've interacted with lots of engineers previously. And yeah, his story is just one of unbelievable innovation. I can't wait to see like his next 10 years, because I think he's going to end up building like definitely $1 billion company. Um, so those are just a couple of our success stories. We also worked with the founders of Alpaca ML, Will and Nicole, two previous Microsoft researchers who moved over from Canada. They raised a seed round from Index, and they are transforming the creative industry with AI. And we also worked with one of the star engineers from LangChain, who was living in London, and LangChain was like, we really need to get him to come over to the US. And so we worked with him. And last success story is a really brilliant AI engineer from Replit who is moving over from Canada too.
Wow. I mean, that's so cool. Just to rewind back, and I'm personally curious about this, H1B usually, once you get your H1B, getting a green card is not too challenging, right? That's like a smooth transition. Is it a similar case with O1 visa, where like once you get O1 visa, then the next step is the green card, or how does it work?
Yeah, so there are many different routes actually to getting your green card. For us, when we do an O1, typically the most common routes for someone would be an EB2 NIW, which is a national interest waiver green card, which is self-petition. So you don't need an employer. You can just apply for it yourself, which is really cool. And then the other route is called the EB1A, which is the extraordinary person's green card. So it's the step up from the O1. And basically what you're saying to the US government is that you're like the best person in your field. And it can be challenging, but again, it's a storytelling exercise with the evidence that you have. And we work with people on EB2 NIWs and EB1As because people really want their long-term immigration strategy. If you're an immigrant, you're like, how do I become a citizen? Like, that's my
Exactly.
long-term goal. And so
Exactly. Yeah.
we like to think about it that way.
Yeah. That's really cool. You have a significant experience on both sides of things, as we already mentioned, but I'm sure building Plymouth from the ground up wasn't an easy process.
No.
What were the most challenging aspects?
I'm trying to think of stuff that's like non-obvious. It was crazy late nights. Some non-obvious things. Plymouth's product is a case you send to the US government. So we write like 500-page research reports about an individual, and we leverage technology, but the end product is a 500-page packet that gets sent to the US government. And in the early days, I would like sit by a printer and print out 500 pages and go to FedEx. Like I literally carried it to FedEx and send it to the US government. And so when you talk about shipping your first product, like founders talk about, I shipped my first product. It was literally carrying this like through the streets of San Francisco and going to FedEx and shipping. And so just like enormous amount of stress, because like you're working with someone's life, like it's so important. I was like scared that like the papers might get blown, so I'd like carry it like really protectively. um and yeah, I think the other thing was that everyone at the time didn't think immigration was a sexy space. Like it was like not cool to work in immigration. It's like really hard. No one believed, like everyone thought it was like crazy. Like you can't fix US immigration. Like it's so hard to do. And finding the resilience to like I was a VC investor, and VC investors have like quite high status signal, which I think is like outsized. Like people are like, oh, VC investors like it's a desirable career path
Yeah,
for
yeah.
a lot of people. So when I wanted to leave VC and start a company in immigration, it was kind of unusual. Like it didn't, it wasn't exactly an obvious thing to do. But it was just a problem like I was obsessed with. Like I wanted to solve this problem. And so that was another part, was like kind of telling people like, hey, I'm doing this thing. And they're like, oh, unusual, but okay, cool, keep going.
I think the best ideas are when you're genuinely like have a strong conviction yourself. It's something personal. One thing is just people start company just for the sake of starting company, but in your case, you really had a true conviction. You wanted to like tackle a real life problem, which also affected you. So I feel like the best ideas, best companies are usually originate like that. Um, what I'm curious because you have to work with the U.S. government so closely, and the tech and innovation works, really fast, very fast paced. But U.S. government, there's a lot of bureaucracy, like with every government. Does that create friction in your work, in your interactions, or like how do you navigate them?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are administrative errors from the US government. Like there might be delays, and sometimes we don't get answers back as quickly as we'd like to because we're working with the government. We try and respond to this by requesting things as soon as we possibly can, and so there are email addresses we can contact. But this is a human in the loop product, like an officer will be reviewing the case. So we know that there can be sometimes issues. How we try and solve that is that we try and make it as easy as possible for the officer to see the information that we're sharing, and so we like highlight things and we underline things and we try and make it like clear because we don't want someone to miss something. But sometimes papers get lost and we have to resend them, and the thing, the long-term plan is that we build relationships with people who've had experience in government so we can share our insights and problems that we're having to try and solve them from the inside. And so we work with Amy Nice, who used to be at the White House, who wrote the clarifications for the O1 visa. She actually invested in Plymouth through the Talent Mobility Fund. She has been helping us on taking the insights and challenges that we see around the O1A and feeding that back in to kind of suggest ideas to USCIS. And we also work very closely with the Institute for Progress, which is a policy think tank in DC, to share some of the challenges we're facing and try and improve USCIS so that they can better serve their constituents, which are immigrants applying for US visas.
Got it. You already mentioned somebody investing in your firm, but and you were a VC investor yourself, so I'm sure you had a lot of ties with VCs. But still, obviously, raising funding, especially as you mentioned, for something that's not seen as sexy like immigration, gotta be challenging. I'm sure you heard a lot of no's before you heard many yes, right? How did you how does that affect your approach to pitching? How did you like construct your pitch, and what was your approach to fundraising in general?
Yeah, so I had actually built a company before Plymouth, which was a climate tech company, and I raised VC funding for that, and I had some amazing investors. But 6 months into building that company, I decided it wasn't my life's passion, so I actually gave all the money back. And when I started working on Plymouth, I decided not to take VC capital because I thought if I took VC capital too soon, I wasn't really sure about the shape of the problem that I was working on, and I didn't know whether it was going to be a venture business. And so I bootstrapped initially, spent my savings on keeping myself afloat, and eventually I actually raised money from philanthropists. And so it was non-traditional funding. Like we are a business, but we raised money from philanthropy organizations. It included Eric Schmidt's philanthropy,
Mm-hmm.
the Institute for Progress, and Tyler Cowen's Emergent Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
And we raised this funding because they were really aligned with our work and understood that it was very important. And traditional VCs weren't super attracted to it. So we raised $1 million, which was huge, and haven't raised additional capital since. And so we're not venture backed, but we raised a pre-seed round, but from philanthropy, not from traditional venture.
Non-dilutive funding. So
Exactly.
that's so cool. That's really cool. Um, and what I was going to ask. So one thing I really wanted to ask, but I'll ask as I remember it. You've been an entrepreneur, you've been an investor, and you're kind of building your own firm. What would you advise to aspiring entrepreneurs?
I think advice. For me, one thing that I've been reflecting on is that there are missionary and there are mercenary founders. Missionary founders are founders who really care about the problem they're solving, usually because it's from personal experience. And so they end up like working on it because it's their life's work. Conversely, there are mercenary founders, and mercenary founders like see a market opportunity and they laser execute on the market opportunity. And it's not because they want to solve the problem because they've been through it. Both founders can be totally successful. Like it's not either or. Figure out who you are as soon as you can, because it's gonna every day you're gonna wake up and you have to convince the world that what you're working on is important. You're delivering value to your customers, you're recruiting team members. And um, if you understand what your motivation is, you can do that much more effectively. I initially tried to be a mercenary founder. When I built a climate tech company, I was like, huge market, interesting idea. I really care about climate as an issue, but I just couldn't wake up every day and solve that. I decided I was just much better suited to being a missionary founder. And just, I think that's like something I would stress is like, who are you? Like, why are you building this? And like, how can you wake up every day and feel energized with what you're building? Because that energy is going to spread to others. And that is, I think, part of how you build a movement around what you're doing.
Okay. I actually remember what I was going to ask. You're a CEO, so you're. I'm not sure how much hiring have you done so far, but I'm sure you have a team around you, and I think the team is one of the core elements behind the success of any startup, right? So, as somebody who's in charge, how do you approach hiring? What do you look for when you're building your team?
Yeah, so we're actually a team of 16 now, which feels crazy.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So we've been operating for just under 2 years, team of
Oh
16.
wow!
We've grown very quickly. And hiring, like like the best people are hard to hire. Like I've spent like months like convincing people to join the team. So a VP of engineering, she's incredible. She was she led some of the front end at Brax. Uh, Took me a lot of convincing. I think we spent like 2 months talking about the opportunity and selling it. Our VP of legal, 10 years of experience in immigration, like absolutely a phenomenal leader in law. Spent, I think, months like convincing her to sign full time. And yeah, I think like uh, you have to be very resilient, compromise, think through. One framework I think about is like hopes and fears, like what's someone's hope and what's someone's fears, and like try and uh, listen to how you can best serve those opportunities. And yeah, building a really strong team culture. Like I believe in collective intelligence. We're all in it to win. We all can get better as part of a collective. And so, yeah, I can't pinpoint one thing, but there's many different strategies for recruiting talent.
Some people are really good at what they do, but they might not be aligned with your mission or like how you want to operate your startup. How do you like filter through that? What do you look for when analyzing that?
Yeah, I think for me it is important about, you know, you're building a culture. If someone doesn't care about the product you're delivering to your customers, they're not a good fit. Like they might be the most talented person and an absolute superstar in their domain, but ultimately you want someone who really gives a damn about the product you're selling, because that's how you deliver customer happiness. And so I look for talent and motivation, because you know, at the early stage, you really need people who are bought in around how you're going to change the world, and they will advocate it to their communities.
Yeah. Lisa, we are at the end of our episode, and it was a very informative, very enjoyable conversation. I really hope we can stay in touch. I really want to see the progress and success of your company. And yeah, so I guess one of the final questions would be, what message would you like to share with our listeners who might be interested in utilizing Plymouth's services?
If you're an immigrant in the US or outside of the US in the technology industry, please come and talk to us. We're at www.plymouthstreet.com. I'll even give my email, lisa@plymouthstreet.com. We help with fast US work visas. We have a 99% approval rating. We've done 115 successful cases. We work with large and small startups, some names you might have heard of: Midjourney, Replit, Together AI, Living Carbon, Alpaca ML, to name just a few. And if you're struggling with immigration, we can support you. We act as a guide. We help you map out your immigration journey, and we can apply for your US visa too. We work with incredible attorneys, so you've got legal support, and we also have a very sophisticated tech-enabled platform to help you in your journey.
I'll come to you, Lisa. I'll personally come to you. Thank you so much, Lisa. It was really enjoyable. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope we can talk again at some point.
Thank you for your questions. It was incredible. I'm excited about what you're doing.
Thank you. Take care, Lisa.